Good morning and welcome to Mental Health Matters with me, Dr. Audrey Tang. My co-host is Judith Crosier, and this is the show where we take a deep dive into all things mental health and well-being. Today's topic is one we haven't covered before, but it's one that is absolutely essential to discuss. It's the prevention of exploitation. And that is why we're absolutely delighted to have Hayley Brown, the CEO of Link to Change in Bedford, joining us. Let's head over to the main studio. Welcome to Mental Health Matters, Hayley. It's really good to have you here.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here.
Well, it's a topic that we haven't discussed before, and I think it's one that's really essential because I don't think we know enough about it. So could you tell us a little bit about Link to Change and the sorts of child and young person exploitation that you have to address?
Yes, so Link to Change is a charity. We've been around now for 20 years. We have worked in Cambridgeshire, but primarily now we work across Bedfordshire and Luton. So we support 7 to 26-year-olds that have been victims of exploitation and abuse. In terms of the types of exploitation, we kind of see it all, to be honest. So, you know, when we first set out, we worked with sexual exploitation because that was the prominent model at the time. As time has gone on and time has progressed, we've moved to a wider model which looks around the sexual exploitation, looks around the criminal exploitation side, and now the increase in digital exploitation as well. So we really see and we really work with all of it, and a lot of the times it's difficult because we can't put them into a category now, because we find that so many of our young people, there will be elements of sexual exploitation, there will be elements of digital, there will be elements of criminal, and so it really is a difficult spider web, so to speak.
That's heartbreaking. And you said, I've got to pick up 7 is your youngest. 7.
Yes,
that's what I was thinking. It's just, it is heartbreaking.
That's incredible to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working in the field of exploitation now for 15 years. The youngest that I have worked with was a 6-year-old, and they had been exploited online quite horrifically and quite graphically as well. And I do think that the younger that they are now is a lot more related to that online exploitation element.
That's horrendous. That is absolutely horrendous. And I'm glad you were able to list so many different things, because I think so many people think exploitation, they think trafficking and modern slavery. That's kind of it. That's where it stops. And in a way, because you think that, you're kind of thinking, well, it's not necessarily my child that's going to be part of this, but you're saying that that's completely not right. We have to be much more vigilant. It's a much broader base. So what's going on out there?
I think the thing is that all too often I hear, I didn't think it would happen to me. I hear parents saying, not my child, I know how to look after my child, I know how to parent my child. And I think as things have progressed over the years, it's actually become more and more difficult to determine who is vulnerable to exploitation, especially if we throw in the digital world. And so I have children, and my 13-year-old, you know, I pick her up from school, we get in the car, how was your day? Yeah, great, you know, and she goes up into her room, and you know, I'm doing homework online, but meanwhile I'm watching this on this channel, and I'm doing this, and I'm FaceTime to my friends, all of those different things. And I think you don't know, you really don't know what is happening, because it's happening now in the home, it's happening now in the bedrooms. And modern slavery, trafficking, yes, they are elements of what we work with, but there is such a bigger, wider scale to all of it. And, you know, I think there's been a lot of work and a lot of press in the last few years around county lines, which then is why modern slavery pops in everyone's heads. But actually it's so much more than that. There's such a bigger picture to that.
Gosh, it's a minefield, isn't it? What do you think might be some of the causes? I mean, parents may be having to work more jobs now and out of the house a lot more. Social media comes into it. You know, what's happening?
I think there is so many. I think we have work that needs to be done in government. I think we need work that needs to sort of be done top, but there's also a lot of work that needs to come from bottom down. And yes, we do have parents that are working 3-4 jobs, struggling financially, if they're being lured and coerced, a lot of that can sometimes be around the money aspect of it, because they feel that they know that their parents are struggling.
Oh gosh, that's really
I think
sad.
let's throw in a pandemic where children and young people are then in a room the whole time online. I think that technology has grown, and there's particular parental generations, you know, don't understand the ins and outs of it all. You know, young people can have 5, 6, 7 different Instagram accounts, and so, you know, a parent might be saying, actually, I've got my child on Instagram, I can see what they're doing. Well, actually, you don't know, because you can't see the other
That's
5
never
accounts
even
that
occurred
they've
to
got.
me. They might have more accounts,
But that, just because they can see what they're posting and they're sharing, doesn't necessarily that they know what those conversations are. And I do feel that technology has a lot to blame for it, as well as the probably increase in mental health concerns around young people.
Of course.
Yeah.
So it's a real multifaceted thing that's going on with it.
It's not easy. And so what can we do then as adults? How can we create a safer space for our children and our young people around?
I think there is a lot that can be done. I think it's about, first and foremost, for adults, parents, to be able to understand what exploitation is in itself, and, you know, having those conversations. If you don't know what's happening with your young person, you don't know what's happening with your child or student or whatever it might be, you might not automatically go, that's exploitation, that's that word, because you might not even know what that word means. So it's about having that education, that understanding around what is it, what do I need to look for, how can I help and how can I support. But more than anything, it's about being able to have those opportunities to provide those young people with a safe space, and for them to feel like they are being listened to. Because if they don't feel listened to, then they're not going to talk to you about what's happening and going on.
No.
I know we're going to come on to the signs and symptoms in the next segment, but could you just give a definition of exploitation for anyone who's just now thinking, right, what am I looking for?
Yeah, so I think there is not an actual category definition for it, but it's basically around power and coercion. So it will be when a young person or a child is being taken advantage of for the benefit of someone else. And the best way to describe that can be through examples. So whether that is a young girl has been coerced through money, drugs, threatening natures, whatever it is, to go and fulfill to the benefit needs of someone else, whether that is sexually, whether that is transporting drugs, whether that is holding something for someone or hiding something or distracting someone else away from and other things. But it is about that power and control. And I think the key thing that we need to remember around exploitation is that it is child abuse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Hayley's staying with us, and we'll be back just after this.
Hi everyone, I am Sinead from Bredor. I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa. Please join me in my Power Hour every Sunday, 12 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on E360 TV. Mwah!
Welcome back to Mental Health Matters. It's an incredibly important topic today. We're talking about exploitation of young people, and we have Hayley Brown. She's the CEO of Link to Change, which is a charity who works with young people. To pick up on something that you said earlier about how young it can be when it comes to exploitation, 7 to 26, you said. When it comes to people being exploited, it's not always the adult exploiting the child. It can be a child exploiting a child as well.
Yes, it is. It is. And actually, I think nowadays that's what you'll find more in terms of that peer-on-peer exploitation and peer-on-peer abuse. I think a lot of and it's really, really hard to get your head round as well, because I know that there'll be certain people that are saying, well, actually, that child is exploiting that child, and therefore that child is the perpetrator, is the criminal. But we don't know the backstory from why this child is doing this. So all too often we'll be in a situation where there's a perpetrator, there is a gang leader, gang nominal, and actually what they will do is they will groom children to groom other children. I've worked with so many young people, and obviously confidentiality and things, but one young girl was so badly exploited, and she was so terrified that she was groomed to exploit other young people, and then found herself in a situation where she didn't know where to get out of it. And then it was the self-blame of her saying, well, actually, but it's my fault because I did this, whereas she couldn't understand her grooming process and the coercion that she had undergone to then have, for her to then go on and groom it and exploit. So it is extremely common that other young people will bring other young people in due to their own fears, due to their own threatenings. Sometimes it may be that they're being asked to, you now need to go and find 3 more young people to bring on because I need more young people, and that's the way that it works, and how the exploitation takes place.
That's horrendous.
And then they're just sucked more and more into it because then they become the groomers.
Yeah.
That's really frightening. So what might some of the signs of exploitation be? What should we look out for?
It's very difficult. I think a few years ago we would be saying, well, actually look out for if the young person suddenly has more money or new coats. There's the classic one of new trainers, new phones. And there are signs and symptoms, sometimes around behaviours. They might be distant in themselves, they might have new friends, you might find a general difference in their demeanour, what they're bringing home, what their attitudes and their responses are to everything. For some, there might be no signs, especially if we're moving into that online territorial world where actually they're not missing school because the exploitation is taking place on their phone, it's taking place in their bedroom. And I think, but it is thinking about understanding what is happening for that young person and offering a safe space for them to feel that they can kind of come to you. If you suspect that, do you know what I've noticed recently, that my child has just the way that they're talking, the way that they've approached themselves, then that can be a sign and a symptom. Again, though, a lot of it is teenage behaviour.
I was just thinking that,
and that's the thing, is how do you distinguish? And I think that is one of the key things of exploitation and grooming, is that you don't know that you're being groomed.
That's the manipulation of it, isn't it?
And that's how difficult it is that young person does not understand they're being groomed. And even us as adults, we probably wouldn't understand that we were being groomed either, even with that comprehension of knowing all those things. And that's why it's so difficult.
So what can we do if we suspect anything as parents or teachers or being around young people? And then what do we do if we suspect something but the young person won't talk about it or denies it?
I think if you suspect something, there are helplines out there, there are the people. Talk to people about it, air those concerns. We are more than happy for if a parent or a professional picks up the phone and says, look, I've got some concerns around a young person. I don't know whether or not it's just me, but this is how I'm feeling, this is how I'm thinking, and explore those. I wouldn't say, let's go guns in blazing to talk to the young person about it, but maybe just try to look at what's going on for them, understand what's going on for them, educate yourself, go online, read about it. There's plenty of different resources out there on how to talk to the young person. But again, it's about creating that safe space for them to feel like they are being listened to, and so that when if they are and they have that concern, they feel that they can bring that concern to you, because at some point each young person will hit a point where they want to disclose. And I think we have so many young people that have probably tried to disclose numerous times, and I've worked with a lot of young people that have disclosed numerous times, but because of whatever professionals are involved, parents are involved, they're not believed, therefore they don't go down that route any further.
That's
Right.
awful.
Yeah.
And with that, when you make a disclosure, this is just coming from working with clients as adults,
Yeah.
when they come to you, the first thing they talk about is not necessarily the thing that's actually causing the bigger problem, but they're almost able to talk about the bit that they can form a narrative around, that they're comfortable speaking about. And that's easier to dismiss, isn't it? It's the, oh, I just don't want to go home.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right, I see.
It's not, they're not going to come straight out with, I'm being extorted for money or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's awful. I mean, what sort of questions can we be asking?
I think, like you say, a lot of young people will test the waters.
Yeah.
They really will test the waters, whether it's a conversation about drugs, whether it's a conversation about relationship, whatever it might be, just to see what reaction they're going to get. Yeah. And I think what we can be doing is listening to them and making sure that it's a safe environment for them, because these young people are experiencing trauma. And I think that is the key thing, is that this is trauma and this is abuse, whether it's the coercion, whether it's the grooming, whether it's the sexual exploitation, whether it's the criminal activities. And what young people that are experiencing trauma need is that safe listening space.
Yes. Now, something I've heard recently is a bit of a political statement, but it worries me. There is no legal obligation to report child abuse?
No.
What?
So what can happen? And so as a teacher, we were all teachers in this company. You're taught safeguarding, so you're taught to report it to safeguarding, and so you do that.
Yeah.
And then safeguarding almost takes that on. But if there's no legal obligation, you could have even reported it. Everyone assumes now we've disclosed, it's going to be dealt with, and it isn't. No. How do we break that vicious cycle?
No, and this is something that, oh, crikey, if you wanted me to talk about it, I'd probably be here for the next 3 days.
We'll have you back, because this is a big thing.
It is a top-down governmental approach. So recommendations went in to the government that actually there should be mandatory reporting. Yeah. They have said that at that moment in time, they did not feel that it was sufficient enough to keep a young person safe. Don't understand how it's not sufficient enough to keep a young person safe, because they're looking at how it's measured, how it's reported, and then what else is done around that. Recommendations have obviously then gone back to Parliament, government, to say, well, actually, no, you just need to make sure that you've got the stringent reporting structures and policies and laws in place. Everybody has a responsibility, I believe, to report abuse.
Yes.
And there has been,
need to be said.
No. There has been a lot of work done. So there was an independent inquiry into child sexual abuse in 2022. That report was then taken to government with recommendations. There were responses came back in 2023, but then what we then found ourselves was in a position where we're then going into a new government.
Of course, yes.
And so with some of those recommendations, that it was then pushed back to say, actually, there should be mandatory reporting. Now, there is reporting for those that are in contact with young people, that are working professionally with young people. Everyone has a responsibility. However, in terms of the law, there is still not a legal requirement to do so. There is a lot of recommendations that need to take place. There needs to be a lot of understanding, but we don't even have really a Minister for Children, because that comes under the Secretary of State role. And so actually, who is taking responsibility and who is making these choices to be able to support and provide for young people more effectively? there's also a lot around the criminal justice system as well, and how that works, and the victims bill. But yes, to answer your question in brief, at present there is no legal obligation, and I think that is something that puts a lot of people off reporting the abuse, especially if they suspect it.
Yes. Yeah, oh my goodness. I mean, what would you say? What key changes could be made then? What do we need to see out there?
I think what we need to see is the way that data is recorded to begin with.
Yes.
That is, and everyone says, well, that's not the top change. But actually, if you don't have how that data is recorded, how do you know what to implement and do further down?
Yeah. So evidence, isn't it? Of course it is.
How it's reported in terms of characteristics, in terms of perpetrators, in terms of vulnerabilities. There has been a lot of research, and we know what those vulnerabilities are that make young people more susceptible to abuse, exploitation. However, none of it is really recorded. We then find an agenda that we run down and we stick down. So for example, at the moment, over the last few years, there's been so much work in criminal exploitation, serious youth violence, but actual sexual exploitation. Because of that, sexual exploitation has now dropped off the radar again. So no one's talking about it, no one's looking for it, no one's understanding that. So it's about making sure that we have that broad spectrum around it. There is also a huge thing around criminal justice, because it's about who gets prosecuted, who doesn't get prosecuted. Does it depend upon, a hot topic at the moment, does it depend upon whether or not they're famous? As to whether or not they get prosecuted?
Yes, that's a good point.
Not to talk about anyone in particular, but there's been a lot in the news over the last couple of years around where that is. What is done around that victims code bill as well, and how victims are supported. And I think for me, the key thing is that I've worked with so many young people that we've got to the point of reporting, we've got to the point of court, and they say, nothing's going to be done about it, nothing's going to change, so why should I go forward and do it? And that is their attitude, because they know that those prosecution rates is 6% on average.
So that's the victim saying that?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
The way that victims are treated about how they are perceived by various different things. I don't know how many times I've worked with a young person and I've got a response back to say CPS say there's not enough information and therefore they can't go forward with the case. So if that doesn't change, our young people are not going to report it, which then isn't going to change. But then even if they do report it, we're then in a situation where prosecution rates are so small and so minor, or community service or something like that. The legal system around all of this really does need to change. But then we're having young people that are being prosecuted when actually that young person was a victim at one point.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah.
So they're being arrested for carrying knives, for distributing drugs. Well, actually, that's a 17-year-old. Are we not looking at why that 17-year-old is doing that in the first place, rather than, right, that's it, another one.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness, there is still so much to unpack. Yes. Hayley, staying with us. We're back just after this.
A world without the arts is one without confidence, creativity and community, and yet funding has been reduced every year. Arts programmes have been shown to benefit social inclusion and well-being, particularly for marginalised groups, with projects fostering a sense of belonging, cultivating mutual understanding and breaking down social barriers and isolation. Participation in arts programmes can help boost confidence and open doors to opportunities that may otherwise be inaccessible. Click Arts Foundation offers grants up to £2,000 for grassroots arts projects twice a year, with our community arts experience trustees meticulously scoring each project on impact and sustainability. To date, we have supported craft and visual arts projects, dance, drumming for well-being, and preservation of heritage and culture. If you share our passion, not just for maintaining the arts themselves, but contributing to the many benefits it can bring, please consider making a donation to Click Arts Foundation registered charity.
Welcome back to Mental Health Matters. We have Hayley Brown, who is the CEO of Linked Change. We are talking about child and young person exploitation. We've just been discussing the problems with the current system and how this really is stopping any victims from coming forward or pushing the case to prosecution because they think nothing can be done, which is horrendous. And whilst we're waiting for all of those things to change, what are the additional risk factors that can lead to someone being exploited? I know it's such a broad topic, but are there certain factors?
I think there are key young people that are more likely, more vulnerable. So those can be those young people that are in the care system, looked after care. We work with a lot of care young people who have been exploited. They've been moved out of county to a different care area, but actually they've then been put in a new home with other young people that have been exploited, and it's kind
not
of so
changed.
So the regulations around that obviously need to be stricter. There are young people that are SEND, so special education needs. We often see quite a lot of young people with autism that have been exploited because of their vulnerabilities. We see at the moment a lot of young people that are from really poor, disadvantaged backgrounds, especially now with the cost of living crisis being thrown in. And so we talk a lot around ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. So whether that there has been domestic abuse in the home, substance misuse, historical abuse, all of those different, parent that has been in prison, those young people tend to be more likely to be exploited, and are some of those. But then, as I say, you, I, all of us, our child, our young person, also it could be exploited just as easily nowadays.
This and relating to that, and I know this might be a bit tricky, but some time ago, Bernardo's, they released a video on something they call the chicken shop grooming sort of scam, really. It's a process. And it was a really interesting video because they were saying how the young person's met in the chicken shop and they bought lunch, and then you make friends that way. It's the start of the grooming, and then you meet them again, you buy them lunch again, and then suddenly it's like, oh, now you've had 5 free lunches off me, you owe me. And that's how it starts. Is there a pattern? Are there patterns that groomers use, or can it just be...
I think chicken shop was great at the time.
Yes,
at the
and
time,
it's not anymore.
At the time, it was chicken shop, but it got the message across.
Yeah,
it really did what it did. That's not to say it still doesn't happen.
No, but it was an old video.
But it could be. I know one young person. They're offered a burger at the school gates. Warm meals at the moment. Cost of living crisis. No food at home, I'm hungry, need something warm in my belly. There is no pattern, and this is the thing about the groomers and the perpetrators. They are intelligent people, and so that what they do is they look for those vulnerabilities in those young people, and then they pinpoint those vulnerabilities. There are still, the classic models around the boyfriend model, the peer-on-peer model, the party. Let's take them to a party. When we were talking about exploitation 10 years ago, all these models were great, and that still does happen, and it still does. But I do feel that they have got a lot more savvy. So what they tend to do is they learn about that young person, they watch that young person, they befriend, and it is the befriending. They befriend them, find out what's happening for them, and then they can offer them all the things that actually they feel that young person isn't receiving, whether it's at home or school or even emotionally.
And just to jump in there as well, with a lot of people seem to think that there's a victim mentality, and this is something I've just learned about through doing a bit of research around abuse. It's sometimes the more confident you are and the more able you are to express the things that you need and what you're looking for, the easier it is for somebody to go, oh, that person wants this, and that often comes from someone who is very much, I know what I want,
Yes.
I know who I'm looking for in a friend. I know what I'm looking for in a relationship. And it's really scary.
Yeah, so not necessarily the sort of the withdrawn,
no,
unconfident people. It's sometimes the opposite.
Yeah,
wow,
quite the opposite. Oh my goodness.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And what about, so obviously a lot of this is perpetrated by gangs. What if somebody wants to leave such a gang? There are risks involved for the person. Is there support for anyone trying to leave a gang?
It's incredibly difficult for them, really difficult because of the threats, because of the manipulation, all the unknown fears. And sadly, there isn't really the support out there. In terms of Link to Change, we are the only voluntary sector charity within the county that provides trauma-informed long-term support for those young people. And that's it. And I think what you'll find is it's very similar across lots of different counties. So if the support services aren't there and aren't in place, then actually there's less chances that that young person is going to try and exit that exploitation and leave, because there's nowhere for them to go. There's nowhere for them to seek that support. And it is about having that trauma-informed support as well, because that's their space, that's their, and when we're working with them, we're working with the trauma, we're trying to build their strengths, but we're not just working with the exploitation, we're working with all of those contextual factors around the exploitation. So we're working with their mental health, which is paramount at the moment with them. To some extent, we're working so much with the mental health that we're not actually getting to the exploitation part of it, because that's such a huge factor with those young people. But there definitely needs to be more support, more services out there. And I think a lot of pressure is put on schools to be able to provide that support, but actually they're at capacity and their understanding to be able to deliver the help that's needed is difficult.
Yeah, it's awful. You can only go so far. You only have so many resources.
I think, we are funded solely through foundations, trusts, grants. We have no statutory, no local authority funding come through to us.
That's amazing.
Our referrals come through from local authority.
And yet they're
not. We're always at capacity. And I think, and that's the thing, is that we could probably have all the money in the world and we would always be at capacity. We could always still need another worker, always need another worker.
You need more people.
Yes.
Yeah, gosh, I can see that. So how do you address, the fact that there's so many parents who are oblivious to what's going on? How would you deal with that?
I think there needs to be more support services for parents, definitely. Again, that is something that's incredibly under-resourced. I think that schools try, because they do workshops. I've gone and delivered workshops within schools to raise awareness of exploitation, but actually the parents that are attending those is the police officer, the social worker, the youth worker, all of those kind of, the teacher, the ones that are already educated. So I think that parents aren't going to understand what exploitation is if they're not educated and made aware of it. So it's about having those support services there for them. We know that a model that works is that if we're working with a young person, the parent equally needs just as much support, because they've got their own understandings, their own feelings, and it's about being able to offer that package of support. But I do feel that parents still go under the radar with it. So for us, it's about trying to get as much awareness and as much education out there for parents, and having that opportunity for them to understand and feel heard. Again, even at the age of 40, if I hadn't worked in this field, exploitation, what is that word? What is that word? What is our understanding of that word?
And if a parent's completely oblivious to it, then they're not going to necessarily seek the information or the help.
No, and
it's a really difficult one.
Let's throw in some not understanding technology either, and understanding how those communications take place. And so it is about going out there and finding the resources that are available out there, and being able to provide that support and being a good friend to another parent.
Yes,
yes, very much so, actually.
And have you heard about this thing? All of those different types of things.
I suppose it's just talking about it generally more, because like us, we've learnt a lot from you today, and so probably have many people. But it needs a lot more people to learn a lot more about it as well.
Definitely.
So on that, how can we find out about your service?
So we can go to our website, www.linkedchange.org.uk. You can follow us on our social medias as well. Pick up a phone.
Yeah.
I know that sounds like a
scary thing. How do we do that?
Crazy thing nowadays. Who picks up a phone? But pick up a phone, and someone will be there, and just, I need some more information on this. Can you signpost me here, there? And we will do what we can to be able to help and support.
Amazing.
Yeah, thank you. We are going to keep Hayley to give us her top tips at the end of the show. We're going to head over to Business Boost. In Business Boost today, I thought I would stick to the topic, and I'm going to look at what employers can do to prevent modern slavery in the workplace. Obviously, it is much broader than that when it comes to exploitation, but this is information from Veriforce chas.co.uk, chas.co.uk. And they say, increase knowledge and awareness of modern slavery. Exactly as our guest has been saying, go out, read about it, learn about it, look for the signs and symptoms, know what you're dealing with, and know why it might happen. Also, nurture a culture of participation and action. So what this means is, be aware of what things people may be going through and how those behaviours may present. So if people show signs of physical or psychological abuse, if they are perhaps trying to get by without the sufficient equipment and so on, be vigilant for those changes in behaviour. Be vigilant for the things that don't quite sit right to you. And if it doesn't sit quite right, voice it. It's not a case of necessarily jumping straight into report, but voice it, because somebody else might say, oh, I was thinking that as well. This is really important. Also be aware of anyone who seems frightened, withdrawn, confused, or changes in behaviour in that particular way. And one of the biggest things that came out in the news recently was how certain large businesses didn't realise that wages were being all paid into one account of different, so it was different workers, but the money was being paid into one account. Be aware, train your HR, train your finance department. The next thing is, of course, observe recruitment best practices. So that means make sure when you're recruiting personnel, you're doing so from appropriate and correct places. Don't cut corners. Make sure you do complete and thorough background checks. And also do your supply chain diligence. So again, what you don't want is sourcing out work to somebody else and then finding out that they are getting the whatever product, service, whatever it is from a company that exploits. So these are just very simple things you can do. Do head over to Veriforce Chas, which is chas.co.uk for more information, and we'll head back to the studio for our top tips. It's the last part of the show. It's been a mind-blowing show. There's been so much to take in, and as we reflect in this segment, I don't even know where to start, actually. I'm still, I think, in a way, stuck on it could be somebody who's 7 years old, and it can be a child who is exploiting another child.
I know, it's quite shocking, and I think, we're quite fortunate in that these things aren't on our radar all of the time, and although when we were teaching, it was probably more so. And we were taught to look out for certain things, but not this. Things seem to have kind of moved on since we were teaching, which wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
And it's become a much bigger and more muddled,
yes,
almost kind of like you know, we were taught to look out for sexual.
Sexual, physical, neglect.
And everything was compartmentalised. And
Yes.
This
Can't be
shows
now.
that it's not like that now.
And it's changed really quickly, so I can see why people are struggling to keep up with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's because we've got you here, Hayley, if you don't mind giving us your top tips.
Of course. I think first and foremost, I would say educate yourself, read, research, talk to other people, seek support in terms of if you don't know, then pick up a phone and ask someone. There's a lot of helplines out there, but there is some fantastic resources, especially from some of the bigger charities out there, as to what to do. I think second of all is to think that it's not just one thing, like you said. Think about it in a real sort of context, because this is how, think about that young person in the middle and all of those different things that are going on around that young person, because it won't just be one element of exploitation. There will be so many other strands that are feeding into that, like I've said before, whether that's their mental health, whether that's poverty, whether that's just around their self-esteem, is a huge thing. And then thirdly is listen. Always listen. And I know that I could probably say listen for the first, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, whatever it is, but really listen about what that young person is trying to tell you. And it doesn't always have to be verbally as well. There are plenty of non-verbal cues out there. Observe them. Is there a shift in their behaviour? That in itself is listening. And because if you start to listen, they will start to trust you.
Wow, great advice.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hayley. If you have any comments to make, please do leave them in the comments section. If you want to get hold of Hayley, her details are with the show notes. And as always, have a healthy week.